So, welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today, I have legislative expert Patrick Lyden here with me to clear some things up around the Kids Online Safety Act to educate parents. I want to talk to you about TikTok too. I don't think we'll have time for that today, but maybe we can follow up later. For some background, and Patrick has been on the podcast before, but Patrick, you are the founder of Current Strategic, a government relation, business development, and strategic initiatives firm based in Washington, D.C. You have more than 20 years of experience in both the public and private sectors, including in Congress and political campaigns, and you maintain strong bipartisan relationships in and out of government. And you've been a great guide for me related to all of these legislative issues and educating me. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
Yeah. So let's go back in time a little bit for listeners and for parents to understand why the Kids Online Safety Act was developed in the first place. And so if we go back to 2021, a document was leaked from Meta, which was just Facebook at the time, but they already owned Instagram. It showed that Meta knew and documented the harmful effects of its platforms for children, yet they persisted in prioritizing profit over addressing the harms. Specifically, Instagram was showing to have major negative effects on teenage users, specifically teenage girls, and Facebook was contributing to violence in developing countries. And so this was all triggered by the first Facebook whistleblower, Frances Hagen, and was covered in all the major news networks. And then next up was a congressional investigation into big tech's lack of protection for minors. So Senators Blackburn from Tennessee and Blumenthal from Connecticut led the investigation and met with parents and psychologists and pediatricians to look further into the platform's harms. They held 5 subcommittee hearings with social media companies and advocates to find out what was really happening behind the curtain. And what was agreed upon was that children are suffering at the hands of online platforms, that big tech was proven to be incapable of appropriately protecting children. And it was time for Congress to step in. So in February of 2022, Senators Blackburn and Blumenthal introduced the Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA. So that was over 2 years ago. And Patrick, can you fill us in on what has happened to this bill in the 2 years since it was first introduced?
Yeah, and you did a really good job of encapsulating all of the work. That is a lot of work that went into not only the investigation, but the formulation of the bill itself. Mm-hmm. And you see the Senate has done a wide range of actions, including hearings, and then now voting to pass the bill, KOSA itself, with another child online privacy bill. Mm-hmm. So the Senate has really taken the lead in these actions. And this is the first time since 1996 that something as substantial as this has passed on a child online safety space. The House is a little bit behind because they haven't done as much work as the Senate has on these issues.
Why do you feel that over the 2.5 years it didn't get the attention in the House that it did in the Senate?
Well, you had 2 great advocates in Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn,
okay,
that know the legislative process. They're respected in their different conferences, and they were able to use all of that to push things forward. So when you have 2 powerful members that are using their time and energy to push a bill, that is what you see the product, the end result of getting as many co-sponsors as they did, as much support in a Senate vote, and then getting final passage. And it's not that the co-sponsors on the House side aren't as active. It's just that that's where the focus was in the Senate. And I think they did a good job of activating third parties and parents. That's why the Senate took the lead. I think now we're going to have to really focus on the House and try to move things forward with them and get them as activated as the Senate has been.
Okay. And important note that this is a bipartisan issue and bill. So Senators Blackburn and Blumenthal are a Republican and a Democrat, right? So coming together to create a bipartisan bill. I think a lot of the work over the last couple of years into this bill has been when working with and listening to concerns from organizations that felt that they may be affected by this bill when it's put into place. So there was some pushback from the LGBTQ plus community. There were concerns that this group would not be able to find and connect with important resources within the social media platforms that they rely upon. And changes were actually made to the bill in February of this year to make sure that this cannot happen. And after that, major organizations in that community were satisfied with the changes and fully supported KOSA. And then another kind of narrative that's been pushed about this bill is that it is censorship bill, that it's going to censor free speech. Do you have thoughts about that?
Those are issues that we should fully consider and make sure that it's borne out in the legislative record. But I think that KOSA and the other child online safety bills do a good job of addressing those issues and saying that, listen, the children are our most vulnerable population and they deserve a little bit more privacy and protections than adults do. And
Mm-hmm.
so it should be up to the platforms to create a safer space for minors, particularly if they're not supposed to be on the platform. And as you have
Mm-hmm.
reported and talked about many times, we
Yeah.
know that there are children that are on the platforms a lot younger than they're supposed to be, and that children are able to gain access before they're supposed to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'm going to break down what is included in KOSA in a few minutes, but I want to just cover a couple of these pushback items. And one thing about the free speech concerns, and this is really a big tech narrative, and organizations that are funded big tech are pushing this narrative about KOSA. KOSA, from what I've learned, is strictly content neutral. It has explicit provisions that have been written in to prevent censorship. I'll read a couple of the sections so sections 102A and B of KOSA states that KOSA cannot prevent a minor from being able to find content that he or she is searching for. It states that the duty of care is specifically limited to harms against children, like physical violence, cyberbullying, sexual exploitation, and illegal substances. So KOSA cannot be used as a means to limit access to content or prevent kids and teens from seeking out important online resources. And so how I think of it is like, can a child, if they want to, seek out self-harm content, if that's something they want to find, yes, that is their right. But can TikTok, for example, continue to recommend like live suicide videos to children in the For You feed? That would be something that is not allowed under KOSA. Lots of big organizations support KOSA: Common Sense Media, American Psychological Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, Eating Disorders Coalition, Fair Play, all the major LGBTQ plus communities. All the parents that I've interviewed that have lost children honestly feel their child would be alive if KOSA was in place, which is one of the big points for me. Who doesn't support KOSA? So obviously big tech, because they're going to have to do more work and make less money if KOSA is implemented.
It's disappointing, but I think you're right. The platforms have made a decision based on business and based on economics and their share price,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if they're a public company,
Yeah.
versus protecting children. And they know that their share price is tightly held to how many users they have on a regular basis, a quarterly basis, or whatever the metric may be. And if those numbers go down because they're taking people that shouldn't be on,
Mm-hmm.
like minors that shouldn't be on or are not authorized to be on because their parents don't want them to be on, then that takes away from audience levels, that takes away from clicks, that takes away from advertising dollars, and it could sink their share price. So it is disappointing when you see that, particularly when the proof is out there that there are these harms to vulnerable populations such as children,
Mm-hmm.
that they're making those decisions. But that's what it appears to largely ride upon, is
Yeah.
share price and advertising dollars.
Yeah. Another example is there's a lot of content that is dangerous, maybe around dangerous choking challenge, for example, that is reported and then never taken down. There's parents that report choking challenges every single day, and maybe they say maybe 2% gets taken down. Those videos are making these companies a lot of money because they have millions of views. So under KOSA, they would have to they have to do a better job removing dangerous content when it is reported to them. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberty Union, recently sent a bunch of high schoolers to the Capitol Hill to lobby against KOSA. Their senior policy counsel stated that the organization is concerned platforms are ultimately going to censor content that the FTC thinks could cause harm. ACLU does a lot of lobbying on behalf of big tech, lobbies against bills that will regulate big tech, and this has been happening for decade plus. And in response to this, I want to share Representative Castor of Florida shared, and she's a leader of the House version of KOSA. She shares that KOSA outlaws practices such as manipulative marketing, amplification of harmful content, damaging design features that threaten young people online. KOSA does not require social media companies to remove, filter, or block content. Instead, the bill would obligate these companies to keep young users' best interests in mind as they design platform features and prioritize these users' well-being over engagement or profit. So I appreciate that response. And I think that, how can you argue with that? So what is KOSA today? And then I want to ask you, so I'm going to talk about what KOSA looks like today. And then I would love for you to fill in on what's happening, what has happened in the
Sure.
Senate and what is happening in the House related to this bill, and why we're on kind of a time crunch in getting support over to KOSA. I'm going to read 5 bullets on what KOSA is today, just so parents understand the main elements of it. I will include a link to the full bill so listeners can read through it. KOSA requires that social media platforms provide minors with options to protect their information, to disable addictive product features, and opt out of algorithmic recommendations. I love that piece of being able to opt your child out of the addictive algorithms. Platforms would be required to enable the strongest settings by default, strongest privacy settings by default for kids. KOSA gives parents new controls to help support their children and identify harmful behaviors, and provides parents and children with a dedicated channel to report harms to the platforms. Right now, parents have a really hard time finding out how to report something. They don't get updated for days or weeks, or it never gets addressed. This is a big failure that within the platforms currently. So KOSA creates a responsibility for social media platforms to prevent and mitigate harms to minors, such as promotion of suicide content, eating disorder content, substance abuse, sexual exploitation, and unlawful products for minors like gambling and alcohol. KOSA requires social media platforms to perform an annual independent audit that assesses their risks to minors, their compliance with this legislation, and whether the platform is taking meaningful steps to prevent those harms. So transparency is a big one. Right now, they're grading their own homework, and parents don't really understand much of what's happening on there. How many kids are on the platform at 3 a.m.? We need to know these things so we can address them in our homes. And
Yeah, that
lastly,
transparency
yeah,
piece is a really big thing because
yeah,
how do we make adequate decisions if we
mm-hmm,
don't have the right information?
right,
And I think we've been talking to policymakers about that specifically, transparency, allowing us behind the big black wall that
mm-hmm,
that is the platforms,
yeah,
but then also giving us better information so that we can make better decisions as
mm-hmm,
policymakers, parents, as teachers
mm-hmm,
and educators. We all need the same type of information so we could adequately judge whether this is right for our children or if
mm-hmm.
there are issues that we should be trying to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and lastly, KOSA provides academic and public interest organizations with access to critical data sets from social media platforms to foster research regarding harms to the safety and well-being of minors. There's not a lot of great research about how kids are actually affected by social media. In fact, the social media companies fund a lot of research on their end about how great social media is. So it's hard to fully understand the effects, like we talked about, of social media on kids. And this would provide some more transparency. Tell listeners what happened with KOSA in the Senate.
Very exciting for the first time in a long time, as I said, I think since 1996.
Mm-hmm.
The Senate voted to pass KOSA along with another bill called the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act,
Yeah.
which gives children additional privacy protections that adults wouldn't enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
It got to a vote in the Senate in July 30th to be exact,
Mm-hmm.
and it passed 91-3. So that is a historic vote. There's a big celebration. Lots of people were excited about this historic passage of this bill.
Great. Okay, and explain that. So explain the differences. So we have the Senate and the House. They're both looking at KOSA, but they're different versions. Can you explain how that
Sure.
looks? What's happening there?
Well, as I mentioned, a lot of the work on KOSA has been in the Senate. So
Mm-hmm.
the House has not done as much work on KOSA and COPPA. So what I fully expect is that when we return in September
Mm-hmm.
and Congress is in session, we may see a few of these child online safety bills, COPPA 2.0, potentially KOSA, and some other bills to move forward in Energy and Commerce Committee,
Mm-hmm.
and then potentially move to a vote there and hopefully a vote in the House of Representatives, so that we can work with the Senate. The House and the Senate can work together to pass something to be sent to the president for signature to give additional protections to
Okay.
children.
Okay. The committee, Energy and Commerce Committee,
That's right.
needs to discuss and vote on the bills first, and then it
That's
goes
right.
to the floor of the entire
That's right.
House of Representatives for a vote. And at that point, the two versions of KOSA could look different. So, what happens then?
Yeah, so then there's what's called a conference committee where both
Okay.
leadership in the Senate and the House get together and they basically work through the differences and
Hmm.
come up with a unified bill, which goes back to both the House and the Senate for a vote.
Hmm.
And then once they're unified, they're sent to the president as a unified package.
Okay. Okay. So still several steps there.
Yes.
Um, and, if you look up the Kids Online Safety Act, you'll probably see headlines stating that KOSA has hit a roadblock in the House. Can you explain if that's true or what that roadblock is?
Sure. Yeah, I think there are concerns. Look, the House has a very different makeup than the Senate,
Hmm.
run by Republicans versus the Senate's run by Democrats.
Hmm.
So they have different styles. I also think parents will get this. There is an adversarial sibling relationship where, the siblings don't always get along and it's
Hmm.
very rare for them to agree on one thing together. So
Hmm.
the House and the Senate traditionally do things a little bit differently. So if the House is able to pass some bills, and I'm told by House leadership and also by the committee that there is an appetite to address these issues and to give parents more protections
Hmm.
for their children online. So we are hopeful that something will pass. It's just unclear what exactly that will be. The chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee would like to pass a larger privacy bill.
Hmm.
That was pulled back in a markup that didn't happen in July. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what the committee might do and where they might be at the end of the day. But we
Hmm.
do know that there is an appetite and they're wanting to do something on these issues. So we're going to keep working as hard as we can to push
Hmm.
this and educate lawmakers on why this is important and what we should have this voted on in the House of Representatives.
Okay. And I'm correct in that there's only 13 voting days in the House in September because they're currently on recess. And then they
That's right.
go on recess again for the election, or what happens after that?
Yeah, traditionally during presidential election years in
Right.
particular, because it's such a big election, the leaders in both the House and the Senate send their members home to campaign
Okay.
for their seats. So I anticipate that is going to happen. There are about 13 days, about 3 weeks, legislative weeks
Hmm.
in September in both the House and the Senate, but you could see the Senate leaders and House leaders give some of that time back. So I anticipate it's going to be a very short legislative session. And
Hmm.
then once those elections happen, they could come back in November and December and do more legislative work. So
Okay.
even if we don't address this in September, there's still an opportunity for this to happen in the end of year timeframe.
Okay. Is it realistic to think that it can go through markup in the committee and go to the House floor for a vote all within September?
That would be difficult, but it's not impossible.
Okay. And then how could the results of the presidential election change how these lawmakers think about passing KOSA through?
Well, the interesting thing is there's going to be a new administration with President Biden stepping down. So
Hmm.
there is going to be a new president this next January, this
Hmm.
next year.
Yeah.
So that could change things on either side. I think what it could do procedurally is it could expedite things if one party has an overwhelming success and they take the presidency and the House and the Senate. You could see a lame duck session where they push something through and get something passed,
Mm.
or it could just kind of stifle things if things end up status quo and you have a divided House Senate administration.
Does the passage in the Senate expire at some point and they have to kind of restart in another
Yeah.
session? Yeah.
When a new Congress starts, all bills that weren't signed into law have to
Mm.
be reintroduced if they're going to be considered that Congress. So
Okay.
the process would start over again. But as we saw with KOSA, the successes that they had and the momentum that they built in the prior Congress led to them passing a bill this Congress. And I
Hmm.
think you might see the same thing in the House where momentum that is built at the end of this Congress might
Mm.
push things forward a little bit quicker in the House next Congress. And as I said, there's a clear rank and file members are telling their leadership that they want to address these issues, that they want to get something done. They're hearing from their constituents. So I know that this is top of mind for a lot of members of Congress.
Yeah. I mean, I think for most parents, there's nothing more important than online safety and nothing more overwhelming than online safety and social media safety. We don't know how to address this. It feels impossible. We have to give our kids access, I guess, at some point so they can interact with their friends, but then they're getting access to pornography and predators and dangerous challenges and all these scary things. So, how can parents get involved in this? And how important is it that parents get involved in communicating our support of this bill?
Very important. I think what carried the day in the Senate was parental involvement, particularly the parents that are now advocates because they've lost loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, if you talk to Leader Schumer, was the factor that really carried things as far as they did. And it pushed him to bring this to a vote. He had multiple conversations with parent groups that had lost children. And it's hard to hear, particularly, look, members of Congress are human. They don't seem like it most times, but they are human. They have families. They're going home and either taking care of kids themselves, or they have children that now have children themselves. So they're
Yep.
they're grandparents. So they see this when they go home. They hear it from their children. They're hearing from their constituents. So it's vitally important that parents get involved, contact their members of Congress, say, I care about these issues. Please push this forward. They do track, every office tracks constituent concerns. And this does boost this, when they hear a lot about one particular issue, that does boost it in terms of support when things are being pushed forward, like KOSA and COPPA and Sammy's Law and other child online safety bills.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. And so parents can go to House.gov. If you don't know who your district representative is, go to House.gov, put in your zip code, and it will tell you who your representative is. And you can either message them through their websites, you can call them. I am currently really actively trying to make an in-person meeting with my representative here. It's been difficult to get that done. Can you show up at the office? Can you show up at the district office?
You can. Okay. Yes. You may not. Look, members of Congress are very busy. They represent so many people, almost 700,000 people in their districts. But they do have staff, and those staff are usually willing to talk to parents and talk to advocates. That's my job, is talking to staff and members of Congress about these issues and educate them on why do parents need these types of protections? What does it mean for children? What are we seeing in terms of the research? So parents can do that as well. It is your right, and I would say responsibility, to inform your elected leaders from the federal down to your local government. Hey, I care about these issues. I care about the harms that this is creating, or this is what I've seen with my own experiences. And that informs member of Congress's decision-making when they hear those stories from their constituents. I mean, reaching out to all members of Congress isn't going to be as helpful for each parent, but if you focus on your individual members who live in their district, Senate, and the House, that will make a big difference.
Yeah. And if you have a specific story of, hopefully not, but if your child has been harmed or affected some negative way by social media, share that story. Or you can simply say, I'm worried about my child online and I would like you to co-sponsor KOSA or support KOSA. The response from my representative, who does not co-sponsor KOSA, was that, it needs to be put to the floor for a vote, and I will consider your thoughts at that time. And I'm pushing for her to co-sponsor. And so am I right in understanding that every co-sponsor helps to get it pushed to a vote, right? So I should continue doing that.
It does. It shows, co-sponsorship shows that there's support. So the leadership, when they're scheduling a vote, have a better sense of who will support this bill. Okay. So it just signals, hey, if it goes to a floor vote, I will most likely vote for this bill. It doesn't always signal that you would, but if you have, it happened in the Senate, they got 72 co-sponsors. So Leader Schumer felt confident in bringing that up, and it wouldn't be defeated. It wouldn't
Mhm.
go down. It wouldn't waste floor time.
Mhm.
He had a greater sense of, and some sense of urgency that, hey, members really want to address this.
Mhm.
So co-sponsorship helps. Don't take no for an answer.
Mhm.
Don't get dissuaded if you get kind of the, initial response of, hey, we'll take your thoughts into consideration when we make our decisions.
Right.
Keep it, as I said, it's your right to continue to communicate and to show that you support this in any way that you see fit.
Okay.
You should try to meet with your members of Congress. A lot of times they do open houses, or they might do visits in parts of their district. They might do conversations where they're hosting conversations.
Mhm.
And there are sometimes roundtables and forums that they put on themselves that you might be able to attend and
Okay.
bring up these concerns as well. So it's unfortunately, it's a lot on, just like with the platforms, it's a lot on the parents, and
Mhm.
it's the responsibility seems to be all on the constituent. It is impactful. And if you have the time in between school, work, soccer practice,
Mhm.
all the stuff that happens in life, it is worth it.
What about contacting multiple times? Is it helpful for me to send a message every week, or is it like, oh, that girl already sent that message?
It doesn't have to be every week. And I
Okay.
don't think that it helps to be annoying about
Right.
it, but the
Okay.
squeaky wheel does get the oil. And I
Yeah.
think people start to understand, hey, this isn't just a one off. This
Mhm.
wasn't just something. A lot of times there are grassroots campaigns to get constituents to reach out to members of Congress. So they'll get a form letter
Mhm.
1,000 times signed by 1,000 different names. That's
Mhm.
not as impactful. I think giving those personal experiences and saying you have concerns, writing in, calling,
Mhm.
if you don't hear from them, reminding them every few weeks, a month,
Okay.
a quarter. It just depends.
Okay. And I did ask one of the staffers when I was in DC recently at one of the representatives' office if you get a form letter, a template that you can tell is, and you get it 50 times, does that get the same priority as a customized note? And she said it goes in a separate pile. So they completely separate those two. I mean, they still consider it, but I think those customized stories and thoughts, whether it's one sentence or a few paragraphs,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Just customize it, I
It
think.
doesn't have to be extensive. You don't have to write a book,
Right.
but just reminding them that you care and
Mhm.
that this has an impact and you would like to see things change is, that is impactful.
Okay.
It gets frustrating. I work with parents and I have clients that care about these issues, and it
Mhm.
does get frustrating when you hear, oh, there's great energy and focus in the Senate, and then it hits the House and it just feels like it hits a brick wall.
Mhm.
It does get frustrating about the process, but at the end of the day, what it does do is it brings better public policy through debate and batting it back and forth between the chambers. They
Mhm.
work at their own pace. So it's just working it through the system, not taking no for an answer, and being persistent will get something. And I do feel like this year in particular, we made great strides. And I would just encourage parents to take that momentum. And if we don't get something passed this year, be disappointed about that, but focus that disappointment into motivation to act and get engaged early on in the process next Congress, because there'll always be a next Congress. There'll always be another opportunity. But I do get why people get frustrated with the process. Seems like nothing is happening here,
Mhm.
and that we're only focusing on silly issues. But I will say the Senate vote and the fact that the House is actually talking about this
Mhm.
and wanting to engage, and that the leadership is engaged on these issues, shows that there's momentum and something can be done.
Okay. And it's not one and done either. I think this is just a continual process. And a lot of people are saying KOSA is just the first step in getting our kids really protected online. It has had a lot of changes over the years to meet the different needs of the different organizations. So if this passes this year, hopefully this will be the first step in a continual production of bills to get our kids more protections online and give parents more help. in the home.
Yeah, as
So,
good as KOSA is, it's not the silver bullet, and
yeah.
there will be a lot of work to
Yeah.
be done.
Patrick, thank you so much for being here and educating parents on KOSA. I'm going to include all the materials needed to learn about KOSA and to reach out to your representatives in the episode notes. And I will be back with more updates on KOSA as we move forward. Thank you,
Yeah,
Patrick.
thank you.
You're welcome.